Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. This episode is with Dr. Maxwell Cooper, radiology resident and founder of the Da Vinci Academy and the Da Vinci Hour podcast. Maxwell and I talk about his podcasting journey and also his med device journey and how he's managed to do all of this during his residency training. For me, this was a really fun episode. It felt like I was just talking with a friend and kind of just hanging out and talking about our lives and what we've been creating. So it's a little bit of a back and forth. I hope you guys enjoy this. If you do enjoy it, please leave us a 5-star rating, give us a comment, tell us what you love most about this podcast. Follow us on our socials, on LinkedIn, Beyond Medicine Group. We'll see you there. Welcome to the podcast, man. I'm really excited to have you on, and I'm excited to just dive in and talk to a fellow podcaster. And I think what our audience would really be interested to hear about is, how do you start a podcast? What goes into building a podcast? How do you get guests? You recently had on Mark Cuban on your podcast. I'm sure a lot of people are curious how you managed to pull that off. And I'm just really, really excited to, when I was in residency, I also started a podcast, and I know how hard it is to juggle residency and also find time to do a passion project like this. So I'm curious to hear about your experience and learn from you. But would love if you could just start us off with an intro about yourself, where you grew up, where you got started, what you're currently doing, how you got into the podcast industry, and all of that.
Yeah, sure. So first, Rami, I just want to say thank you for having me on your podcast. You know, like you said, we just had you on mine, which was a lot of fun, and I think we'll have fun on this one too. So I'm excited to get into it. So my current, I guess, day job, if you will, is I'm a resident physician at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a PGY3. And so I'm in the radiology department there, getting trained in both diagnostic and interventional radiology. Eventually plan to pursue interventional radiology for the majority of my practice. Mainly vascular and musculoskeletal and oncology interventions are kind of what my interest lies, but we'll see where that ends up or how it shakes out. And then I spent most of my life in Ohio before I came down here. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in the suburbs, went to college at Case Western Reserve University, and then stayed there, did a master's in physiology, and then did a research year before med school, which was at University of Toledo, which is kind of near you in Michigan, where you grew up. So yeah, I knew a lot of people from Michigan. We were kind of right there at the border, and then came down here for residency, did my internship here in clinical medicine, which was at Grady Hospital, which we could probably do a whole podcast on my intern year. It was just full of all kinds of crazy stories, and it was a great learning experience, but it was something else for sure. It's the county hospital here in Atlanta, so we see all the craziness and just really crazy complex pathology. But anyways, so yeah, now I'm doing radiology and IR, and then in addition to that, like you said, I host a podcast called the Da Vinci Hour Podcast, where it's really just, as we'll get more into it, I think, but it's kind of just interviewing, the way I describe it is really physicians is kind of the main focus of the guests, but I've had a number of non-physicians on as well. And so it's really anyone who's making a big impact in healthcare. So physicians, entrepreneurs, researchers, people like that, making people starting companies, doing innovative things, both in digital health and then also in medical device development, which I'm also personally interested in because I am involved in some medical device projects here as well we are fortunate to have Georgia Tech down the road, which is a big engineering school. So we're working on some minimally invasive device projects with them as well. So keeping myself busy these days as much as I can.
Very cool. Well, I'd love to get into your podcast in a little bit and how you got started, and maybe we can focus a good chunk of this conversation on how to start a podcast. I'm sure there's some listeners here that have, thought about it, thought it might be cool, had an idea. I think that there's obviously a lot of resources already out there on how to start a podcast, and I think hearing about it from other doctors that have done it might be helpful. And I can share my personal experiences as well as anecdotes. But before we get into that, I'd love to. I'm just really curious about your background. Like, would love to know why you got into radiology. These aren't questions I typically ask on the show, but I'm just curious. I feel like you have a diverse set of talents and interests and media and device. So I'm just really curious, why radiology? Why'd you go into radiology? Was there something in particular that drew you in? Did you like the technology aspect of it? So really, why radiology and why interventional? And then maybe we can just go from there.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I, you know, reflect on and is kind of evolving. My answer kind of evolves, but I think it all started back when when I went to med school, kind of two constant things have stayed constant throughout it is one, I always loved working my hands. I thought I wanted to do surgery at first, either neurosurgery or orthopedics or something like that. And then I always liked innovation, medical. So I knew I wanted to be some type of proceduralist and some type of innovator in medicine, which I'm at least training to be at this point right now. I still got a few years left to go to get to the point I'd like to be at, or some of the people I admire. But so yeah, I would say I think what drew me to radiology was I had a hard time picking my specialty. And it's actually kind of, which we'll get into a little bit later, is kind of why I started the podcast in the first place. But I feel like you're rushed through all these rotations in med school. You don't get necessarily the best look, or certain looks at certain specialties, especially some of the more like kind of niche ones like ENT or ophtho or things like that. But so what I would say is that I did rotations in neurosurgery, I did rotations in ortho, general surgery, obviously cardiothoracic. I liked all of them. I really liked the surgery. I liked working my hands. I liked that you also took care of patients as well. I would say the one thing that always stood out though is I wanted to do innovation, and I started this company called Da Vinci Academy in my third year because I tutored anatomy. I really loved anatomy, again, working with my hands, doing the dissections, but then also just the conceptual aspect of anatomy, how the body's put together, how pathology affects anatomy and those types of things. And then using anatomy to kind of, guide procedures and interventions. So again, that was further fulfilled by different surgical specialties. But what I noticed is that most surgeons are very, very busy. They have very little time for anything else. And so I did. And the other thing is, like, you can't really do most surgery specialties part time, which is something I probably won't do initially, but maybe probably down the road. And when I'm in practice, consider doing is, or at least having like 1 or 2 days a week where I do non-clinical stuff. And so you can't really be a part-time neurosurgeon. It just doesn't work out that way. And so, I would say, and just different other aspects. The level of call. I was not interested in taking that level of call for all of my career. Obviously, you got to pay your dues and do that early. But what got me into radiology is I spent time when I was on neurosurgery in the neurointerventional suite, which with the neuro IR guys doing stroke interventions, aneurysm interventions, and things like that, and just I was just blown away, like the way you can use minimally invasive. I mean, just through a little pinhole poke in the groin, put it through the femoral artery, and you can pull a clot out of someone and dramatically. I'll never forget it when we had a code stroke come in, and we did a thrombectomy, or the attending did a thrombectomy, not me. But and then I got one day, but I had the really the privilege to round on that patient in the morning and see that they came in with right upper extremity weakness, and they couldn't move their arm, and then they were had regained a significant amount of their function. So I think the ability to dramatically impact someone's life, in such a way with minimally invasive, rather than these big open surgeries, which, are still very cool and still have their place. But I think being able to do it through minimally invasive, letting patients go home earlier, have less problems and complications, I think really appealed to me. So got into residency, applied for radiology residency because I knew that I liked the diagnostic aspect as well, using imaging, learning more about the anatomy, like, how I said I had that passion for that. And then really combining those with procedures, it just kind of seemed like a natural fit. And then, like you said, the innovative aspect, I think I always wanted to go into a field that had a lot of potential for innovation. And so IR is one that is ripe with innovation. There's new devices, I think, probably coming out almost every day now. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, that's kind of, it was kind of a torturous path, but that's how I ended up getting into radiology and IR.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that you thought about other aspects of the specialty, not just the clinical aspects, like the full-time schedule, being able to work part-time and do your own hours. I think that's not often talked enough about, because I remember specifically for me, like I went into medicine wanting to do orthopedic surgery, but then I realized that I didn't want to dedicate my life to the hospital, and I didn't want to. I also had a similar thought process. I was like, if I do medicine, I want it to be like on a part-time basis, because there's other things that I want to do in combination with that. And like, I remember that being a big decision maker for me. But yeah, interesting that you say that. Were there any other elements of radiology that particularly drew you into it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I would first comment, it's an interesting comment you made about how I consider things not just within the clinical realm. I mean, a lot of people, they go into especially diagnostic radiology because it's great hours, it's good pay. You don't have to deal with a lot of the nonsense
Yeah.
that, or I shouldn't say nonsense, but the things that could be aggravating that people may think are nonsense, in the more clinical specialties, having to, answer the pager after you go home, those types of things that can be annoying to some people. But anyways, it's interesting to bring that up because I have a lot of med students that reach out to me about, what specialty. And I always think about, not just what you like clinically, which I think is important because I loved orthopedics. I loved neurosurgery. I loved other aspects of other surgical specialties, but it was just kind of, I kept coming back to, I wanted that time. It was kind of, I think you need to think about what you want out of your career. That's the advice I give to medical students. And it's not just clinical. You got to think of how that clinical work plays into everything else that you're doing. So, I mean, if you're married with 5 kids, you got to think about how, a surgical specialty would play into that. Maybe it can, obviously there's people that make it work, but you got to think about kind of what you want. Also, I think a lot of people come in thinking they want to do, a ton of research or basic science research. And I mean, really that, if you want to do a surgical specialty, that doesn't usually, there's obviously people that pull that off, but I don't think that always works out well. Cause I remember I had someone reach out to me that said they want to do like high level neuroscience research and be a neurosurgeon, which there are those individuals out there, but I think, you got to be at the right hospital, the right academic center for that. And you got to really ask yourself, is that really what you want? And so I think that's an interesting, observation you made. So yeah, I would say what else drew me to the field was really, I think the ability to just do really innovative, device development. I think learn more in depth about the anatomy. I think what's cool about radiology is we, and IR for that matter, is we're involved in, every organ system. I mean, almost every patient that comes through the hospital or through a clinic sees radiology, whether it's for an X-ray or, some of these high-level MRI scans we're doing now. And so I think it's just interesting to be, you're not limited to one particular area. So, versus like a neurologist or a cardiologist or those types of specialties. So I think the ability to be involved in many different aspects of care and many different settings, we read scans for patients in the ICU, in the inpatient setting, outpatient setting, those types of things. And so, and then obviously IR is just an amazing field. I could go on about IR because we just, we do procedures all over the body. It's just amazing. And there's new, and just like devices, they're just new interventions that people are coming up with now. I mean, people are coming up with all these new spine interventions and musculoskeletal, which has kind of really piqued my interest as well. So.
Do you think that you want to maybe create a medical device for IR someday?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. It's something I'm working on right now with one of my co-residents. I got to give a shout out to John Moon. He's a phenomenal innovator. He invented a device in medical school and started a company, and so he's working on that now.
Wow.
And yeah, he's a very talented individual. He's been a great guy to work with, and so he got me involved. He knew I was interested. He had some other ideas for projects. And we kind of got together one night and just had a brainstorming session. And it was just, we were at his apartment and just kind of thinking of new device ideas because there was this grant coming up through the Emory School of Medicine that we wanted to apply for. And we came up with the idea that we ended up applying for, which is taking basically a sensor and putting it into an arteriovenous graft to detect clot formation. And so what we did is we, got with some collaborators, wrote this grant, and we won over $100,000 in grant money for this particular project.
What? Dude, that's amazing.
Yeah. We did not expect this to happen. We, obviously, and we're doing this like on top of, I think, doing rotations and things like that. And we're just,
This was in medical school a couple years ago.
No, this was during residency. This was like, I think we got the grant maybe a few months ago, I think. So this is more of a recent development. Yeah.
Yeah. Add that on top of podcast host and media company. Damn, you're doing a lot, man. That's
Yeah,
amazing,
yeah.
though. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's it's not just us. We have some great faculty advisors. We have an engineer at Georgia Tech that we're working with who's really developed some really innovative technology. Dr. Ya over at Georgia Tech, he's running a phenomenal lab. He has all these clinical collaborators. He's basically coming up with all these sensor technologies that have all these clinical applications, which is really cool. And thankfully we have some in IR.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's kind of the goal. We're working on that. We've also patented some catheter device that we're still kind of working through as well. It's kind of we have like an engineer working on that for us. So it's a lot of like we come up with the device and design, but it's funny, neither of us are an engineer by trade, but we kind of
Yeah.
think of these
And
devices
you
and
come up
help.
with the idea.
Yeah,
You
we
come
come
up
up with
with
the
like the idea and theoretics of like how it should work, and then partner up with an engineer. Then.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. And I think if for any physicians or medical students out there that are thinking about trying to get involved in this particular device, especially devices, I think this could probably apply to digital health too. But I think the real advantage you have as the physician is the clinical need, because I've talked with engineers who have really brilliant, innovative technology or ideas that they're working on. But some of the clinical applications they think they just don't. You can tell it's like they don't understand. It's kind of what we talked about on my podcast when you were saying how, with some of these companies you've talked with, it, they just don't know what they don't know. And so it's the same thing here with engineering. They have brilliant solutions, but they don't necessarily know where this fits into the clinical space. And so, this technology was developed already that we're trying to integrate into basically a basic arteriovenous graft. And, now we have, we knew this is, dialysis, as dialysis, patients are, an ever growing group of people with end stage renal disease. And so I think we can help a lot of people with this particular application. And so that's, as as we can talk about later, is getting things funded, getting business people interested. You can't just help like two patients,
Mhm.
unfortunately. Like you got to come up with something that's going to have
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a wider effect.
yeah. Interesting. So, is this something that you can potentially do part time, like starting a med device? And because I'm guessing there's a number of steps you got to jump through. You got a patent, number one. Probably there's some regulatory things and hurdles you got to jump through, and then I'm guessing clinical trials as well would be a part of that, or is that not
Yeah, so
necessary?
it's interesting you bring that up. The medical device is not as stringently, and this is kind of a controversial thing. It's not as stringently regulated as like the pharma industry is. So the pharma industry is very stringently regulated. I believe you need two pretty robust clinical trials to get a drug through. That's why the drug approval process takes so long. The medical device process
Hmm.
is still lengthy, but not nearly as lengthy as the drug approval process. So yeah, I think there's
Hmm.
basically what's called pre-market approval, which is where if you come up with a brand new device and it's an implantable device, and there's more nuances to it, but just in general terms, then you have to go through, like you said, a clinical trial. But again, it's not and again, there's different opinions on this. It's not as robust as say like a long-term, clinical trial you would do with a new drug. Now, there's also what's called the 510K approval, which is the other kind of the two. Those are kind of the two buckets of approval. And the 510K is more
Yeah.
so for if you develop a device that's kind of similar to what's already out there, you don't necessarily need a clinical trial to demonstrate, efficacy and that. So I think if you kind of just have some, more basic science and lab testing that demonstrates the efficacy, then that will be, in some cases
Hmm.
enough to get it approved. And it just depends also on what you're trying to do. But yeah, I think as far as where this fits into
Gotcha.
what I want to do is, we're gonna have to bring other experts in along the way. We're in the very early stages. We're kind of refining the design process right now, and then with the other catheter device, we're kind of in the prototype stage with that. So it's really just kind of coordinate. We're kind of like the overseers at this point, or the coordinators. We kind of move things around, make sure all the moving parts are moving in the right direction and that type of thing. And so I think eventually what we'll probably have to do is start maybe a company or an LLC and then apply. There's these government grants which are pretty cool called small SBIR grants, some small business innovative research grants, I think is what they stand for. And they're
Oh,
from the NIH and they're for small businesses working on innovative technology. So our hope is, maybe eventually apply for one of those and kind of start out a company and recruit some more people to help us bring this to fruition. So that's kind of the long-term goal. I think where it fits into clinical practice, I think at least for the short term, I have to balance it on top of everything else I'm doing. But thankfully, I've got a lot of other people, working with me. I'm not doing this alone. So
Very cool. Are you guys going the 510K route?
I think so. I think that's what we'd like to do. I think sometimes it's not up to you; it's up to the FDA. But I
Right.
think that's our hope is to go that way, because we're essentially just
Yeah.
using something that's already, like, people are putting arteriovenous grafts every day into patients. So I think we're hoping that we can just kind of
Yeah.
ride that wave.
Are most of these medical devices in specialty specific industries, like, are they usually created by clinicians? Like, who are most of the inventors of these devices?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. That's something I've kind of just read more about and talking to people. I think it's a mix. I think there's some very, very innovative physicians out there that they come up with it's usually, if it's a physician, they usually have done it like many, many times. Like there's a famous
Got it.
IR
Yeah.
named Bob Smouse, who's, I think he's on his, he's invented, I don't even know how many devices. And then there's a guy like Tom Fogarty, who's a vascular surgeon out in California, who I think has 200 something patents, and now he owns a vineyard out there. He's just kind of enjoying life out there. Julio Palmez also owns a vineyard out there. He's the guy who originally invented the coronary stent. So he was actually an IR.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's got a big
Yeah,
vineyard.
yeah, he's got a big vineyard, big house. Yeah, yeah, he's living good out there. But yeah,
Do they when they get a patent, is the business route to get the patent and then license it out, or what's is there a strategy around it? Because I'm sure that they're not always going and starting the company themselves.
yeah, I think it's a mix. I think in the old days, you could kind of come up with these projects and start with companies. A guest I had on recently was Dr. Gary Michelson, he's a billionaire physician inventor. I think he's one of like 15 or 20 physicians that are on like the Forbes, billionaire list. And he has like not something like 900 patents. Incredibly innovative guy, really just a brilliant guy. And he did that all while practicing orthopedic spine surgery full time. Like I asked him, I was like, did you ever think about going part time, or even just quitting altogether and doing, because he was making way more money doing devices than he was as a practicing doctor. And he goes, no, I loved surgery, I loved practicing. So he
Hmm.
never gave it up until he doesn't practice anymore now. He does philanthropy, but he would do what you're talking about, more so licensing. He never really kind of started his own like device company and hire salespeople and all that stuff. I think what you're seeing more now recently is there's a lot of
Yeah.
people start small companies more as kind of, it holds the intellectual property. It's, kind of gives you a little bit of legal protection. It allows you to kind of raise money versus just raising money yourself. And then usually these get acquired. It's kind of like the strategy you see a lot of people do, because to get to get a device to approval is already an arduous process, but then to actually get it out and make money is a whole different ball game. I mean, you've got to get a full sales team in, you've got to get marketing and all that stuff, and where partnering with the big players like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, those types of companies can help you bring it to the large stage.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of times companies are looking to save time, right? So they're looking to acquire, especially like private equity, that sort of thing. Like, they'd rather buy a company that's already saved them 6 months, a year's worth of time of getting approval and like success. So you can get a pretty significant exit through just that concept.
Yeah, yeah. There's always the stories of
Yeah.
physicians, unfortunately, that weren't as savvy as they should have been, probably. But yeah, if you play your cards right, you can have some pretty nice exits for sure in the medical device.
What are some cautionary tales or examples of that?
I don't know if I have any. I always think of there. I remember there was a case, I was on a cardiothoracic surgery rotation, and there was a perfusionist, the guy who runs like the heart lung machine when someone's on bypass. And I remember him. He was telling me about a cardiac surgeon he worked with who he had developed some type of catheter device for the heart lung machine specifically. That device was ended up, he patented, I don't even know, I think he patented it and he sold it for like some small amount of money. Maybe at the time it seemed like a lot of money, but he ended up,
Wow.
or he didn't do, basically he didn't do a good job of protecting his IP. And this bigger company took it over, because he really did it just to make better patient care is basically was his goal. Like, which is kind of a funny,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. You see this a lot. A lot of these physician inventors, like they're just trying to improve patient care. A lot of times they're not trying to become billionaires or, necessarily change the world or anything. They're just trying to make patient
Right.
care better or make their own lives easier. And so he invented.
Yeah. Which is why they build great products.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. And so he invented this device, and the perfusionist ended up telling me, he told me, yeah, if I had played my cards right, I'd be a multimillionaire off of that, and I probably wouldn't even have to do surgery anymore. But he literally made no money off of it. So someone else made a lot of money off of it. And
Oh, wow.
there's unfortunately other examples of that out there where I think people are either too trusting or they don't, I think one thing that you need to do is you can always, and Gary Michelson talked about this, is you can always apply for a provisional patent. So if you have your idea, you get it down, you write it up, you file a provisional patent, and then you have a whole year to kind of fully develop that before you have to apply for like the real patent, like the, a fully, working patent that is much more expensive and requires an attorney and things like that. And so I think, for people out there thinking of developing device ideas or any type of patentable idea, just file a provisional and then work on it further. And then you can get people to do non-disclosure agreements and things like that. And people, then you can kind of have some legal protection there.
Yeah. Well, with the provisional patent, are there certain requirements? Like, do you have to draw out the whole idea, describe how it works,
Yeah.
like
So
that sort of thing?
along with my co-resident John, we wrote a provisional patent for one of the that catheter device I was telling you about. And so, yeah, you come up with some schematics you use. It's good to have like CAD. John's really good at doing CAD drawings. So we were able to come up with some nice CAD drawings for the device. And then, yeah, you write up exactly what you said. You write up how it works, and you don't need to have a functional, we certainly didn't have a functional prototype at all at this point. We just had essentially an idea. And, you write up
Hmm.
how it works, you write up a lot of the clinical indications. And with that, you try to be very broad because, if you say, like, let's say you come up with some kind of stent device and you're like, this is a great stent for coronary artery disease. The problem with that is, yeah, that's a huge market, but stents in itself is a huge market, because people could use those, in the carotid artery or in the femoral artery or, wherever. And so you just cut yourself out of just right there, neuro and peripheral vascular disease, two massive markets. And so, I think making the language as broad
Hmm.
as obviously you don't want to be too ridiculous, but making it as encompassing as possible is the ideal way to write it.
Got it. And you don't need to hire a lawyer to do that. You can learn to do that yourself
Yeah,
and
yeah. So
apply
for
for
that,
it.
we didn't need to hire an attorney. If you're at a hospital or a university, you can, use the Office of Technology Transfer at, wherever you're at to kind of help you. But even that, like, you don't necessarily even need to involve them at that stage. I think they're always willing to help you, but that's something you can file without having to spend,
Hmm.
a ton of money on legal fees or anything like that. I think it's like a couple $100 to file a provisional patent with the U.S. Patent Office.
Interesting. Well, damn, you're doing a lot, man. Very impressive. My first thought is, how do you have time to do all of this? So we got to get into that a little bit. How are you juggling all of these things?
Yeah, it's people ask me that all the time, and I try. I'm not ADD, but I feel like I have so many things that like pop into my mind, and believe me, there's like 10 other things I'd love to do, but you gotta cut it off at some point. So
You can do anything, but not everything.
yeah, 100%. I think
Yeah.
that the way I do it is, and the advice I've gotten from and this is some people I've talked to on the podcast. Like one guest I had was Dr. Lars Svensson. He was a very early mentor of mine. He's the chair of the Heart and Vascular Institute at the Cleveland Clinic, and just an incredibly brilliant and phenomenal clinician and then surgeon. And then he was one of the PIs on like the TAVR, like transcatheter aortic valve replacement, that was, had like 5 papers in the New England Journal of Medicine. I mean, he's just probably one of the most accomplished people in medicine. And I remember I asked him something like this, he said, you always want to make sure you deliver the best patient care. So he's like, you always want to make sure you take good care of your patients. And so I think for me, I always make sure that my clinical work is the number one priority, outside of, my family and things like that. But as far as my professional aspects of my life is making sure my clinical training and work comes first, and not to compromise that, because at the end of the day, that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here to do. And so I think that's kind of number one. But how I balance it, I think, It's evenings and weekends. I've kind of gotten to the point now where I do things that I'm very passionate about. So I don't do something unless I'm very passionate. Like I have attendings who ask me to work on some research project with them, or write up some abstract. And I mean, respectfully, I don't do it if I'm not interested in it. And so it's, fortunately, I'm at this stage now where I have enough other things going on, and I don't need things to fill my CV. Fortunately, I've gotten to that point where I can kind of just pick things
Yeah.
that I want to work on. And I think that's really important. I think even if you're at an earlier stage, even when I was a medical student, I mean, obviously you do things to kind of help move yourself along and fill your CV. But I think don't do something unless you're not super passionate about it, because then it just becomes a chore. And so I think for me, it's kind of
100%.
picking things I'm passionate about, picking things that I really enjoy, that I'm excited about. And then I think as far as time goes, it's, what I do in the evenings. I'm not married, I don't have kids, so I think if that were my scenario, that would probably wouldn't be able to do as much of this stuff. But I think and I play golf, I
Yeah.
play tennis. Those are things I've done since I was a little kid, so I fit those in. But I don't do those as much as I'd like to, And I try to stay fit, I try to stay work out and stuff. But sometimes that falls by the wayside, which I probably shouldn't let that slide as much as I do. But yeah, so I think it's kind of just organized, and then I'm just very like my calendar is crazy. I'm always checking it. I'm always making sure that I don't, because if I don't put something on my calendar, I'll forget. It just won't happen. And so I think keeping myself extremely
Yeah.
organized,
100%.
keeping, those types of things. And then it comes in waves. Like there's certain times where like I'm working a lot on the device stuff, like we're writing, like that time we were writing a grant, I wasn't doing much else. I don't think I did any podcast episodes during that time. I didn't, I wasn't making videos for the YouTube
Hmm.
channel. I wasn't doing anything like that. And then there's times where like, we're kind of handing things off to the engineers, and then, I can do more with the podcast, or do more with, making stuff for the Da Vinci Academy YouTube channel. And so it kind of just comes in waves, and kind of where I focus my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Any deep dive efficiency tips? Like you said, scheduling and staying organized is really big. For me, it's everything. Because I'm naturally a very unorganized person. Well, I think in my younger days. So I had to develop habits to get organized, or else my life was just chaos, because I think I was a little bit on the ADHD spectrum myself, undiagnosed, but still. Um, and so organization and structure is everything to me. And so, like, if something's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. Um, anything in particular for you, like, that, like, really makes a big difference in
I
your life?
think that doing the calendar, I think my Google Calendar, I put reminders in there. Like I'll put it's ridiculous. Like I'll put like 30-minute, 1 day, 2 day, 5 day, like multiple reminders for stuff, just that, like, so I don't forget that something's coming up, or that I need to do something. I think I even put stuff in my calendar where like I need to call somebody, or I need to follow up with somebody, or things like that, because otherwise it won't happen. I used an app called Toadist, or I think that's how you say it. I'm probably not saying it right, maybe, but it's a free app. I think you can pay for like a premium part of it, but I used that a lot in medical school. It's nice because you can electronically put it in your to dos. You can access it on your phone. You can give yourself email reminders. Problem is, I don't use that as much anymore because I have too many to dos to do. So it just gets kind of overwhelming when I open it up. I keep a Google Word document with kind of the immediate things I'm trying, because a lot of the tasks I put down, they can't be done in a day. Like, you can't put down do podcast episode whatever. Like, as you know, that's a process. Like there's a lot involved in that. So I think I try to
Yeah.
put, schedule the podcast, record it, edit it, and so on, post it. Uh, which sometimes you can't do that all in 1 week,
Yeah.
especially when you're balancing other things. So I think I try to just keep like a weekly to-do list of things. And then I kind of have a global to-do list in the background of like, man, it'd be really great that when I get all these things done. But I don't look at that as often, because then it just makes me feel sad that I don't have as many things crossed off as I'd like to.
Yeah. Yeah. Any productivity hack that you've, like, discovered in the last year or so that's really made a big difference in your life, that, like, for sure doing this one thing made a significant change for you?
I don't know if it's one such thing. I think it's really what you decide to spend your time on and focus. I think if you're excited about it, you're going to have the energy for it. I think, especially if you've worked, done a clinical day, or like even you, like all the things you're working on, I'm sure, beyond medicine group, you have all these other things you're working on. So I think, it's very obvious that you're very passionate about beyond medicine group and your podcasts and everything. And so that's why I think it's so important to pick things that you're passionate about, that you're going to have the energy. Cause I mean, a lot of times when I do these things, I'm tired. Like I'd rather just hang out, like, and so I think that's
Yeah,
kind of been my drive. I'm
100%.
sorry. I don't think I have like any super great efficiency
Yeah.
tips or tricks or anything. I think it's just being passionate about what you're doing, I think is probably the biggest
Yeah.
thing.
Dude, 100%. I would agree with that. The reason I ask is because for me, I've noticed that when for me, a recent discovery for me is that setting like these daily goal benchmarks. For example, when I was growing the Beyond Medicine group community, um, when I first started, I was like, I'm going to send out 20 invites a day and until I get to 100 invites, and then I'll slow down a little bit. And so every day I was emailing, messaging, LinkedIn, whatever, 20 people. I had to hit that benchmark. And I could do it whenever throughout the day. And like I wouldn't even notice it. Like I'd be between calls or something, or I'd be, in between doing something, I'd go on LinkedIn and then send a few more messages. And by the end of the day, I'm like, I've reached that number. And right. And like I realized something in that process, and it's that if I set this intention out and this goal for each day, like I have to have, because if you don't set the goal, the whole day will pass and you haven't sent out one, right? And I realized that I have to proactively set these goals every single day, and even every week, set a bigger goal and then break it down into smaller goals by a daily process. For me, that like this was only in the last couple of months that I discovered, like, I'm sharing this now because maybe it'll resonate with someone or maybe they'll think to do that, but setting that daily goal of, like, "I'm gonna do this today," literally changed my life.
Yeah, I think that's, it's interesting you say that. I would say if anything helped my efficiency, it was honestly intern year. I think what as you're telling me about this, having this, these daily to-dos,
Mhm.
as you know, when you come in the morning, you have your patients you got to go see, you have your to-do list, for essentially for each of your patients. And like, these are things that like, they can't get put off. Like they have to get done. You have to put these orders in, you have to follow up on these labs, you have to follow up on this imaging, whatever. And so I think
Yeah.
you have certain. Right, in the back
A
pocket.
folded
Yeah,
piece of
yeah.
paper.
Oh yeah. No, I still do that on IR.
Yeah.
and
Yep.
and so I
As
think, yeah, I think residency, it's kind of like, as it's like it's sink or swim. Like you kind of have to. You kind of, at least intern year, like when you're the one, fielding a lot of that stuff, like it kind of makes you, manage things and multitask and get things done in an efficient way.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, that's pretty cool, and yeah, dude, intern year for sure made me much more productive. I think training in general did. Um Especially getting used to working, like, those long hours. Now it's like we're putting in the regular hours every day is a lot easier. Um, let's switch gears for a little bit because I think a lot of people are curious to know more about your podcast and how you started it. And like I mentioned, I think a lot of people have thought about starting a podcast, especially now. Um, and would love to hear, how you got started and what it was like getting started, and if you have any practical tips for anyone who's looking to get
The
started.
podcast, I would almost say, this may be hard to believe, I would say I was almost a reluctant podcaster in a way. It was something I tossed around the idea because I consume a lot of podcasts. I really, because being busy, I like listening to them when I work out or when I'm on the go and stuff. Like it feels weird to drive in the car now without listening to a podcast. And so it was something I really thought about doing, but kind of I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. I don't know if I'm that great of an interviewer. Like I don't know. I was kind of like hesitant or reluctant about it, but I did it.
Dude, you're a natural interviewer. You interviewed me, and I was like, that was probably one of the best interviews that I've personally been interviewed.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, and it's good to hear that, and because it's now it's become something I love doing it, and so I think how I got started was, I produce it through Da Vinci Academy, which is a company I like I mentioned, I co-founded in med school, and we started out, we made a bunch of video courses for anatomy, histology, and biochemistry, and then we've kind of segued into, we had a kind of an educational podcast called Da Vinci Cases. So I was sort of a podcaster, I guess, in a way that we had these cases that we put out, and it's actually gotten fairly popular. It's these like case videos that we've put out. I used to do them every week, and now it's, if you look at it, it's like every few months. And so I'm sorry to anyone else who listens to out there. I'm trying to do them more in bulk or get other people. I got a med student to do some of them for me, so those are coming out soon. But anyway, sorry, I digress. And so I wanted to help promote all these the Da Vinci Academy, and so I thought podcast is probably be a good way to do that. And so it kind of started out as that, and then I didn't want to just do it to promote the YouTube channel. It was more to provide value, and kind of what we were talking about earlier is I felt like med students, you don't always get the best look at certain specialties. You don't always get kind of the inside on different specialties. So I was like, I'm going to bring some people on that I know really well, that I can ask them the kind of questions that you might be afraid to ask as a med student. So I brought, a mentor of mine on who's an attending neurosurgeon that's just a phenomenal guy. And, he's stayed a mentor to me. I was just talking to him last week, and so I picked his brain, because I think people need to realize, kind of the full extent of some of those specialties. And I think it's evolved now to other things that I ask about. But, I asked about call, what's that really like? What's your lifestyle really like? And so I think the first 10 episodes were they were a lot of like focusing on people's specialties and things like that, and then kind of getting an inside look at like what their lives really were like. But something interesting happened where I would ask them a lot. I always, I don't know if it's just the nature of the people I associate with or what, but a lot of these people had other things going on outside of clinical medicine that were really interesting. So the feedback I started getting was, hey, like we like hearing about this person's, like how they did their research, how they balanced that with their clinical work, or this person, how they developed this device or this technology or worked on this innovation project. So I started kind of evolving, and now it's kind of evolved to more where I've done a few specialty videos recently, or specialty episodes, but it's more focused on kind of how people are making their impact in healthcare, kind of like what I talked about earlier. So now it's, a wide array of guests, and that's kind of how it's evolved. And you know how it is,
Yeah.
like these podcasts, they kind of have a starting point, and then as you do it and get more guests and learn, it kind of evolves, if you will.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I've learned so much. I've done probably over 100 episodes now, and we've probably released 70 of them. And I've learned so much from talking to people. And I think and I've learned a lot from our listeners as well, because I'm constantly asking for feedback and how can we make this better. And I try to elicit honest feedback. Like I tell people, like, roast me. Like I want to know. And I roast myself too, because I'm extremely critical. Like, so when I listen back to every single episode we do, take notes, and try to figure out how to make it better. But I think what a lot of listeners like is they like to see themselves in someone else's story. So as you're listening, you want to see how can you want to relate to the person, right? You want to see yourself in their story. You want to see yourself either as them in the future or doing what they're doing. I think that's a big motivator. That's why we listen to, people we admire or inspire to be like, or people who are going through a similar struggle as us, that have gone through something very difficult that we're also currently going through, which I think is like for the doctor community, it's why we want to hear from other doctors, especially ones that are doing things that, either we're too scared to do or we want to do one day, or we don't know how to do, but like there's another doctor doing it. So if they can do it, we can do it, right? It removes a little bit of the imposter syndrome, because you think that, if another doctor did it, then you could probably do it too. They figured it out. Um, so it's a really, you learn a lot about like psychology, I think, of like how to be a good listener, how to understand what people, and you probably are realizing this now. Being the interviewer and being the speaker are night and day.
Oh yeah, 100%.
What do you enjoy more?
I enjoy being on this end, man. It's it's funny.
Yeah.
It's I do that. I just show up. That's all I'm doing here. Like,
Yep. Yeah. But it makes you a better speaker. I don't know if you've realized that or not yet.
yeah, I think definitely. It makes you a better speaker. I think it makes you think more critically about your conversations you have with people, especially when it's I mean, obviously you're hanging out with your friends, that's a different story. But like if, when you're having professional type conversations, I think it makes you more attentive to things. It makes you ask better questions. It makes you, I think the way I prepare for interviews has helped me prepare for like meetings and things like that, where I want to, obtain a specific objective and things like that. So yeah, I think it's an incredible networking tool too that I didn't anticipate at first.
Oh,
I mean,
oh my gosh.
the people I've been able to speak to, through this podcast, like I mean, I don't think they would have responded. I mean, they would have blown me off. I mean, I'm,
Well, you had Mark Cuban on your show, which we have to talk about.
yeah. I mean, I still get asked about that all the time. That's like I remember I talked with Aaron Fritz the first time I met him. It was literally the first question. He goes, "The first question I have to ask you is how in the world did you get Mark Cuban on your podcast?" It was the first thing he said to me, and
Yeah.
so I really, it was just a cold email. I mean, I found his email address. I read an article because he gets email. He does everything through email. Like he doesn't do business meetings. He doesn't like go to an office. Like he does everything through his email. Now I don't know if he has like more than one email, probably,
Yeah.
but the one he like puts out to the public is just like mcuban@gmail.com. And so it's like anyone can email him. And so he
Yeah.
reads, he theoretically, he says, he told me when I interviewed him, he reads every email he gets, but he said he probably deletes over 90% of them. And so he likes, and I got this sense from
Yeah.
talking to him is he likes when you're very direct. He does not want to hear your life story. He does not want to hear like, how you got inspired to do something in fifth grade. Like he wants you to get straight to the point. And so, so I, I wrote a very,
I
I
don't
think,
care why you wanted to become a doctor.
no, yeah, he doesn't want to hear about that. And so he wants, I mean, and I get it. I mean, I can't even imagine how many emails he gets. He's probably getting
Yeah.
tons of emails at this moment right now. I mean, and people pitching him things
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
asking him to show up for things and stuff. So I think I just made it very like specific. I said, I think, what you're doing with cost plus drugs could be very beneficial for my audience. I said, we don't learn about this, as in med school or even residency. We don't learn how the pharmaceutical industry works. And he's like, I listened to him on another podcast and I mean, it was unbelievable. I'm like, he knows probably more than a lot of doctors do about how the whole pharma business works. And
He
so,
does. He knows a lot. I was listening to one too. Yeah.
it's amazing. And I mean, he's an incredibly smart guy. I don't know how he learns like all this different stuff, but I think, it was, that's how I was able to get him on. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't have, I'm not an NBA player. I don't know. Otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get a chance to talk with him. And,
Any other dream guests that you have?
I would say, I think anyone who's making a big impact, I think, Tom Fogarty, somebody I'd like to talk to. I think just to pick his brain, even just to talk with him for 10 or 15 minutes, even just to like, it's amazing just to pick these
That's
people's
the
brains.
inventor.
Yeah. The guy, he was a vascular surgeon for a long time. He ran like a venture capital I mean, talk about a guy who like literally did it all. I mean, he practiced surgery at Stanford. He, invented all these devices, started numerous companies, venture capital firm. I mean, just amazing. And I think just to pick his brain, another guy is Toby Cosgrove, who was the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, incredible innovator. He's not the CEO anymore, but he's since retired. But just incredible innovator, incredibly busy clinically. I mean, just learning how these people operate and do what they do is just incredible. And then Sanjay Gupta, who's on the faculty here at Emory, I'm trying to get him on. We'll see if I can get him. I'm having a hard time finding a hold of him. So if anyone knows how to get a hold of him, let me know. But I'd love to have him on. I see his name on scans that get ordered in radiology, so I know he's out there somewhere. Yeah,
Oh, really? That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah. He still practices a little bit. I think mainly at Grady
Yeah.
Hospital actually, which is the county hospital here in Atlanta. So we'll see what happens.
So are you more so curious about we'll go back to the podcast building, but I want to keep going on this tangent here. Are you more curious about people's stories or like just how they did it? Or because that's what I like sometimes for me, I like selfishly I want to like know how they did it. Like one of the things that I uh like ever since I was a little kid, like if someone did something I didn't wanna just hear like, "Oh, I did this." I hate when people play things down. Like, I need to know the details of how you did it because my brain doesn't work that way. Like, I have to visualize, like, and like, understand it. Like, wow, I need to know the details. And so that's sort of, I think that's why I like talking to people, because I really want to know how they do certain things, because then I can apply that knowledge to my own life and uh, maybe take pieces here and there and integrate it into my life. Um, and it turns out like a lot of people want to hear that too.
Yeah, definitely. I'm the same way. You know, it's funny you say that. I like finding out how people tick. I try to ask like kind of like how I said when I started it. Like I wanted to ask the questions that like everyone wants to know the answer to, but maybe won't are afraid to ask. And so, you know, what started out when I would ask them, you know, just different attendings and stuff. You know, I'm not a med student anymore, so I can get away with asking some of this stuff. Plus, I know in the early days I knew these guys, so it wasn't like a big deal. You know, I knew they wouldn't care. But I think even still, like I try to a lot of the way I prep for my interviews is I listen to the guests if they've done other podcasts. I listen to at least like one or two other episodes they've done on another podcast, and I try to. Obviously, you're going to ask some of the same things, but I try to ask things that are more specific, that are even just interesting to me, and I think might be interesting to other people. So yeah, I think getting people's story, and yeah, I'm very interested in people's career path. Like even though it's kind of the focus of the podcast has changed, I always try to dive a little bit into that. You know how do they get started? Like recently, I it's not hasn't come out yet. I interviewed Tiffany Moon, who's a anesthesiologist in Texas, and she was on the Real Housewives of Dallas, you know, which is like a reality TV show, and which is and you know, just she's got this huge social media following now. And now she does all these media appearances, and so one of the things I asked her was like, how did you even get into that? Like, how does a doctor get on a reality TV show like that and you know and everything. And so it was just interesting to hear like you know she said she had never done any like TV or media or anything like that before, and she just had a friend who was also on the show and you know she was approached by the producers, and then it's just interesting to see. And then you know these people who build these companies, I think as you've done on your podcast, it's fascinating to hear like because you think it's all sunshine and rainbows. You don't realize like, and you know, I know you know this very well, is that it's a very bumpy road. There's a lot of things that happen you don't expect. There's a lot of really, I mean, it's really hard to get a company and start it from nothing and bring it to something where like people are actually paying you money for your product or service or whatever. It's incredibly, incredibly hard. And I think it's important, one, to
Yeah.
hear those stories, but also to like for people to know that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's funny because when you talk, I've realized this when I talk to these founders that have done this successfully, they're so humble. Like they just talk about it in a way like it was easy, but it wasn't. You know, they've gone through a lot of struggle and pain to get there, and maybe that's why they're humble because, like they've probably been through a lot, but yeah, I agree. People's stories are fascinating, and I think it's one of the best things about doing a podcast. And um, like, there's so many positives. Like, I can't even tell you the number of opportunities that I've had come in through the networks and the relationships I built through this thing, and I'm sure the same is happening for you. So I think that, and I think everybody should have one. I mean, if you can speak well, I mean, even actually, if you can't speak well, it's probably more reason to do a podcast because it will make you a better speaker. And even if you don't want to do one that's fancy and it's just with you and your friends, and maybe you don't even do anything with it, but I think it's a great learning experience.
no, you know, I learn something from every episode I do, you know, no matter who it is, you know, and I think it's an incredible networking opportunity, but it's also a great learning opportunity. And I honestly, I just like I said, I was very reluctant to do it at first, and I love doing it now. It's like the main thing I focus on. I used to, you know, like I said, I did some video courses and stuff. I don't really do that as much anymore. I mean, they're still out there for people on the YouTube channel and stuff. But this is like kind of my main, as far as like my media things go, like this is kind of my main focus now. And it's just, you know, and yeah, like you said, I've had some unique opportunities come. I didn't even plan on that or have any you know hope for that really, and they've kind of some unique networking and other opportunities have come as a result of it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Do you have any help? Did you like do this all on your own? How did you get started?
Yeah, so for Da Vinci Academy, my co-founders were my two brothers actually. So I don't know if my parents planned it this way or what, but so I'm a physician, and then my one brother is a software engineer, and then my other brother is in finance. He did investment banking for a long time, and now he's in private equity. So shout out to Charlie and Jacob, my two bros. And so they started the company with
It's
me,
awesome.
and I had this idea back then, that was when like, things like Pathoma were, kind of all the craze, and Sketchy Micro and all those other resources people use. So I was like, I think, people are looking for more easy to use online based education platforms, and they bought into it, and, we're 5 years later, we're still doing it. And so, uh, but as far as the podcast goes, yeah, I mean, I approached them about the idea. They immediately thought it was a great idea. They were like, "Oh, you should totally do it." They were very encouraging about it, and it took a few months for me to like finally one just kind of figure out what I wanted to do with it. Feel like I was ready to do it and start it, and really they helped me with kind of all the aspects of it. Getting it on the website. We kind of split the editing. I do some of the editing. They do some of the editing. My one brother helps me with we're trying to make new, like those like preview clips you see, or those like teaser clips from different episodes, like a high point of the episode. We're trying to get those out and put those out on our social media. So just people can see kind of the highlights of the podcast, and then also just to raise awareness about it. So yeah, I do a lot of the work. I do all the scheduling myself. I do, obviously all the recording and stuff. And then, but I also have some help as well, which is good.
Very cool. Yeah. And now it's a lot easier now to start a podcast. There's all these streaming sites where you can, basically it's like turnkey start your podcast. And you really just got to record and upload your audio, which is pretty cool. It never used to be like that. Um, so it's a lot easier today, and you really just got to jump on Zoom and press record, and you got something to go off of. Uh, but yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time, Maxwell. I think that what you're doing is great, and I definitely think we're going to stay in touch, hopefully, and continue to collaborate together. Would love to help my audience, follow you, listen along. You can check out the episode you and I did together, where you kind of turned the tables here, and I went into a lot of my life story actually on the podcast, which was really fun. But where can we send people? Where can they follow you? Where can they get in touch?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I appreciate it. Yeah, so the podcast is the Da Vinci Hour podcast. You can I think it's the only podcast named that, so you can search it on all the different. It's on every major platform: Spotify, Apple Podcasts. The website, it's hosted on the same website as Da Vinci Academy, which is dviacademy.com. So you can see our different videos on there, and our educational video content, and then also the podcast is housed on there as well. With every guest gets their own page, and we have their little bio and description of all the different episodes. So if you're looking for more information than just kind of listening, and then as far as you can find me on LinkedIn, just Maxwell Cooper MD. Searching that, I'm at Emory. There's actually another Max Cooper MD at Emory, which is kind of funny, but I don't think he's on LinkedIn. He's much more famous than me. He's a Lasker Award winner, so maybe I'll have to get him on the podcast soon. Yeah, yeah. So I should have thought that when you asked me who else. I plan to hopefully get him on too at some point. So that'd be funny. Um, but anyways, yeah. So you can add me on LinkedIn, and then I'm trying to build up my Instagram too. It's at Maxwell Cooper MD as well. So that's where I post I post every announcement about the podcast on there. I'm starting to put some clips. So we made a cool trailer for the podcast that's on there. And then all the Da Vinci Academy is on all the major platforms too. Twitter, Instagram, there's a LinkedIn page too. So you guys can check out what we're doing there as well.
Perfect. Maxwell, pleasure to have you on the show, brother. I appreciate it, and definitely looking forward to staying in touch.